The grand hall of Alexander Knight's mansion stood in its usual silent elegance, the kind of silence that whispered wealth and loneliness in the same breath. Sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows, bouncing off golden accents carved into the mahogany walls. A sprawling crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, glistening like frozen rain. Everything about this mansion spoke of power that came with a cost. Alexander Knight, the man behind it all, stood near the window. In a navy three-piece suit, his sharp jawline reflecting in the glass. To the outside world, he was the ruthless billionaire, CEO of Knight Enterprises, a man whose name alone could make markets tremble. But behind that cold exterior, there lived a man haunted by trust, or rather, the lack of it. Years of betrayal had hardened him. Friends had sold him out, business partners had cheated him, and women. Well, he had stopped believing in love long ago. And yet, here he was, plotting something unusual, a test. A cruel little experiment to answer the question that gnawed at him every time he hired someone new. Can I trust anyone? That's why today he left his personal safe open. It wasn't just any safe. Inside lay millions in cash, neat bundles stacked like bricks of temptation. Diamond-studded jewelry and gold chains shimmered under the soft light, treasures that could change anyone's life in a heartbeat. Normally, this vault stayed locked under a 7-digit code only Alexander knew. But today, its door gaped open. Like a forbidden secret, deliberately waiting to test one person, the maid. Her name was Elena Brooks, 22, new to the city, struggling to make ends meet, working multiple jobs just to keep her mother's medical bills paid. She had been with Alexander for 2 weeks, quiet and efficient. No gossip, no unnecessary chatter, just work. She carried herself with grace, yet something about her eyes told a story of hardship and sacrifice. Alexander noticed everything about people, especially the ones who worked for him. He had cameras in every corner of the house except the private quarters. He didn't watch them all the time, but today was different. Today, every movement mattered. Elena entered the study that afternoon with a cleaning trolley. She wore her usual uniform, simple, modest, nothing flashy. Her blonde hair was tied neatly in a low ponytail. She hummed softly under her breath, unaware of the storm waiting for her. Then she saw it, the safe, wide open, and inside a fortune. Her breath hitched. For a moment, she froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. No one was around. The room was empty, silent, except for the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Her heart began to race. Why is it open? Is this a mistake? She stepped closer, almost against her will, drawn by the sheer magnitude of what she was seeing. Bundles of cash, more than she could ever imagine holding in her hands. Gold necklaces, diamond bracelets, each one worth enough to pay for her mother's surgery 10 times over. Her hands trembled slightly on the mop handle. A voice in her head whispered, "One stack, just one. No one will ever know. You could save her." But another voice, louder, steadier, fought back, "No, this isn't yours. This isn't who you are." Elena bit her lip, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She had never stolen a thing in her life. But desperation could make even the most honest person falter. She stared at the safe for a long moment, the weight of temptation pressing down on her like an invisible hand. Then she took a deep breath, clenched her fists, and stepped back. Instead of touching the money, she picked up the dusting cloth and began cleaning the edges of the safe. Her movements were careful, almost reverent, as if she were silently telling herself, "I will not fall for this." Unbeknownst to her, Alexander was watching. Hidden behind the slightly open door, his piercing eyes never left her. When she stepped back from the safe without taking a single bill, something inside him stirred. For years he had seen greed devour loyalty. But this girl, she was different. Or was she just cautious because she thought she was being watched? He had to know more. And so, with slow, deliberate steps, Alexander entered the room. Elena jumped slightly at the sound of his shoes clicking against the marble floor. She turned and froze. There he was, the man himself. The billionaire she worked for, standing tall and impossibly handsome, his sharp gaze fixed on her like a hawk. Her heart pounded. Did he notice her staring at the safe? Did he think she was stealing? Panic shot through her veins. Alexander said nothing at first. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, his deep voice broke the silence. "See something you like, Miss Brooks?" The question hung in the air like a blade, sharp and deliberate. "See something you like, Miss Brooks?" Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. Her mind scrambled for words, but nothing came out at first. She felt her throat tighten, her lips parting slightly as if to speak, then closing again. "Does he think I was going to steal?" The safe stood open behind her like a silent accuser, its treasures glimmering under the chandelier's glow. She could almost hear the sound of her own pulse pounding in her ears. I was just cleaning, sir," she finally managed, her voice soft but steady. She lowered her eyes quickly, afraid to meet that piercing gaze. Alexander studied her carefully, his sharp eyes scanning her every movement. There was no tremor in her voice, no flicker of guilt in her tone. Yet, experience had taught him one thing: everyone wore a mask. He stepped closer. His presence filled the room, commanding and intense. "Cleaning," he repeated, almost as if testing the word on his tongue. "And the safe? Wide open, overflowing with temptation. Didn't even cross your mind?" Elena swallowed hard. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. "It's not my business, sir," she said quietly, gripping the edge of her cleaning cart like it was her lifeline. "I don't touch what isn't mine." For a brief second, Alexander felt something stir, a flicker of respect, a shadow of doubt about his own cynicism. Is she really that honest? Or just clever enough to play the part? He tilted his head slightly, his lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Most people would have at least thought about it," he said softly, almost to himself. "I'm not most people," Elena replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Alexander's eyes narrowed, intrigued. "Not most people." "They." Words echoed in his mind. He walked past her, his expensive cologne lingering in the air, and stood in front of the open safe. With slow precision, he traced his fingers along the steel door, then closed it with a low metallic click. The sound reverberated through the room like the closing of an unspoken deal. "You've been working here for 2 weeks," he said without turning to look at her. "Always on time, no complaints. Quiet, efficient." He finally turned, his gaze locking with hers again. "But everyone has a price, Miss Brooks, everyone." Elena met his stare, her green eyes steady now. "Maybe," she said softly, "but some things aren't for sale." That stopped him. He wasn't sure what surprised him more, the calmness in her tone or the conviction in her words. He had seen greed in so many forms, disguised as loyalty, cloaked in affection. But this was different. Or was it? Alexander slipped his hands into his pockets, the picture of composed elegance. "Interesting," he murmured. Then, without another word, he walked out of the room, leaving her standing there with her heart still racing. When the door clicked shut behind him, Elena exhaled shakily. Her knees felt weak. She gripped the cleaning cart for support, her mind spinning. What just happened? Was he testing me? And if he was, did she pass? Meanwhile, in the security room, Alexander walked down the grand hallway, his expression unreadable. He entered the private monitoring room, a place only he had access to. Dozens of screens glowed in the dim light, showing every corner of the mansion. He pressed a button, replaying the footage of Elena in the study. He watched her freeze at the sight of the open safe, watched her hesitate, watched her step back, and start cleaning instead of reaching inside. No hesitation for long, but it was there. A few seconds where she considered it. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "So," he muttered under his breath, "you're either the most disciplined thief I've ever met, or you're exactly what you seem." For the first time in years, Alexander Knight didn't know which answer he wanted to believe. That night, Elena sat on the edge of her small bed in the staff quarters, staring at her phone. A text from the hospital blinked on the screen. Urgent. Payment required for next treatment cycle. Her chest tightened. The cost was astronomical. She had less than 2 weeks to come up with the money. Her eyes burned as tears welled up, but she blinked them away. "You did the right thing," she whispered to herself. "You did the right thing." But for the first time that day, a terrifying thought crept into her mind. What if doing the right thing costs me everything? Far above her, in his lavish penthouse suite, Alexander stared out at the glittering skyline. For years, loneliness had been his companion, but tonight something felt different. That Maid, the one with the steady green eyes and quiet strength, she had done something no one had in a long time. She had made him curious, and Alexander Knight never let curiosity go unanswered. The next morning, Elena woke before sunrise. The mansion was still, the air cool with the scent of polished wood and faint traces of expensive cologne lingering in the halls. She dressed in her uniform, tied her hair neatly, and stepped into the grand kitchen to start her duties, but something felt different. There was a note on the marble counter with her name written in sharp, elegant handwriting. "Miss Brooks, meet me in the study at 9 a.m. AK." Her stomach knotted instantly. Alexander Knight, the man who could make or break her world with a single decision. Was this about yesterday? Did he think she was a thief? Would he fire her? She folded the note with trembling hands and slipped it into her pocket. Her mind raced as she went about her work, barely tasting the coffee she sipped. Her nerves fraying with every tick of the clock. At exactly 9, she walked toward the study. The heavy double doors loomed ahead, and for a moment she considered turning back. But then she thought of her mother lying in that hospital bed, frail and waiting for medicine Elena could barely afford. She squared her shoulders, took a deep breath, and knocked. "Come in," came the deep, commanding voice from inside. The study was warm, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, illuminating the shelves lined with rare books and the massive oak desk where Alexander sat. He didn't look up immediately. His eyes were on a file, his long fingers resting lightly on the papers, as though even the slightest pressure could bend reality to his will. Finally, he raised his gaze, and there it was, that piercing stare that seemed to see straight through her. "Miss Brooks," he said, his tone smooth, almost too calm. "Sit," Elena obeyed, perching nervously on the leather chair opposite his desk. Her hands clutched each other tightly in her lap. Alexander studied her for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "You saw the safe yesterday," he began. Her throat went dry. "Yes, sir." "You didn't take anything?" "No, sir," she replied softly, her voice steady even though her heart pounded like a drum. "Why?" The question sliced through the silence, and for a moment she hesitated. How could she explain something so simple yet so complicated? "Because," she drew in a shaky breath, "because it wasn't mine, and I don't steal." Alexander tilted his head, his lips curving into the faintest smile. "That's rare these days." She frowned slightly, unsure how to respond. Then he leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, his voice dropping lower. I like people I can trust, Miss Brooks. And yesterday, you made me believe you might be one of them." Her pulse skipped. Was this praise or something else? He continued, his tone deliberate, almost calculated. "But trust is a fragile thing, and I intend to find out if you deserve it." Alana's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" Alexander opened the drawer and pulled out a checkbook. He scribbled something quickly, then tore the check and slid it across the desk. Her eyes widened. The amount written on it made her dizzy. $100,000. "This is for your mother's medical bills," he said casually, as if he hadn't just placed a fortune in front of her. Her hands froze, hovering over the check but not touching it. Her lips parted in shock. How do you?" "I know everything about the people who work for me," he interrupted smoothly. "Your mother's condition, the hospital's demands, your financial situation." Elena felt her cheeks flush with a mix of shame and disbelief. I can't take this," she whispered. "Oh, you can," Alexander said, his tone cool, commanding. "But nothing in this world is free." Her heart sank. "What do you want from me?" He leaned back, his expression unreadable, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Loyalty. Complete, unquestioning loyalty. For as long as I need it." Elena stared at him, stunned. "Loyalty?" "Yes," he said simply. "I don't trust people easily, Miss Brooks. But you might be worth the risk." She swallowed, hard, torn between relief and fear. "And if I say no?" Alexander's lips curved into the faintest smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Then I'll find another maid." "And your mother?" He let the sentence hang in the air like a guillotine. Elena's hands trembled as she stared at the check, her mind screaming in protest, her heart breaking under the weight of choice. Take the deal and lose her freedom. Refuse and lose her. Mother. For a long, heavy moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with tears stinging her eyes, she whispered the words that sealed her fate. "I'll do it." Alexander studied her silently, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. Once, slowly, like a king granting a favor. "Good," he said softly, his voice smooth as silk. "From now on, you work for me, and only me." As she rose to leave, clutching the check like a lifeline, she didn't notice the way his eyes followed her, dark, calculating, and something else he hadn't felt in years. Interest. Because Alexander Knight didn't just buy her loyalty. He had unknowingly bought himself a reason to feel again. Elena stood in the vast hallway clutching the check as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her heart was still pounding from the conversation in the study. She had agreed. She had sold her freedom, at least for now. But what did Alexander Knight really want from her? Was it just loyalty? Or something far more dangerous? Later that evening, the mansion glowed under the golden lights of dusk. Elena moved through the rooms quietly, her mind heavy with thoughts. She couldn't deny the relief that washed over her knowing her mother's treatment was now possible. But there was an uneasiness creeping into her bones, a fear of the unknown. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Dinner. 8 p.m. Wear something elegant. AK. Elena stared at the screen, stunned. Dinner? With him? She looked around as if the marble walls could give her an explanation. What was this? A gesture of gratitude? Or another test? Her instincts told her this wasn't about food. At 8 p.m. sharp, Elena walked into the private dining hall, wearing the only dress she owned that could be called elegant, a simple black dress that covered her completely but still carried quiet grace. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, a faint touch of lip color giving her a fragile kind of beauty. When she stepped inside, her breath caught. Alexander was already there, standing by the head of the long oak table. He wasn't in his usual suit, but in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, the top button undone, revealing just enough to make him look effortlessly powerful. For a moment, Elena froze, feeling completely out of place in this world of marble floors and golden chandeliers. But his eyes found hers instantly, sharp and unreadable as ever. "Miss Brooks," he said smoothly, gesturing toward the chair beside him. "You're on time." She nodded silently and walked toward him, every step echoing in her ears as she sat. He poured wine into 2 crystal glasses and slid one toward her. "I don't drink," she said quietly. "You do tonight, Alexander," replied without a hint of compromise, his gaze locked on hers. Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't just dinner. This was another test, one that had nothing to do with wine and everything to do with control. The meal began in silence, the clinking of silverware against porcelain filling the air. Finally, Alexander leaned back slightly, his eyes studying her with unnerving calm. "You haven't asked why I did it," he said suddenly. Elena looked up, startled. "Did what? Paid for your mother's treatment? Bought your loyalty?" Her throat tightened. I didn't think it was my place." He tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Always so careful with your words." "I'm just grateful," she said softly. "More than I can say." "Gratitude," he murmured, swirling the wine in his glass. "A dangerous thing. It makes people feel indebted." Elena's grip on her fork tightened. "Are you saying I should feel that way?" "I'm saying," he replied, leaning closer, his voice low and smooth, "that I don't like being disappointed, Miss Brooks." Her breath caught. There was something in his tone, something dark and commanding, that both frightened and fascinated her. "I'll do whatever you ask," she whispered, hating how vulnerable her voice sounded. Alexander's eyes glinted, as if that was the answer he expected. "Good," he said softly. "Because your first real test is tonight." Elena froze. "Test?" "Yes," he said, setting his glass down with a soft click. "I have an important meeting in the city. I want you to come with me." Her heart lurched. "Me? Why?" He leaned back, his gaze steady and calculating. "Because the people I'm meeting will try to get close to me. They always do. And I want to see if you can handle being in my world without breaking." Elena swallowed hard. "And if I fail?" Alexander's lips curved into that faint, dangerous smile again. "Then I'll know you're like everyone else." The ride to the city an hour later, Elena found herself sitting in the back seat of a sleek black limousine, the city lights flashing past the tinted windows. Alexander sat beside her, scrolling through his phone, completely composed, as if this night meant nothing to him. But for Elena, it meant everything. Every nerve in her body was on edge. She glanced at him, trying to read his expression, but his face was a mask of calm power. When they arrived at an exclusive rooftop restaurant, the kind where billionaires closed deals and politicians whispered secrets, Alexander stepped out first, his presence commanding immediate attention. Elena followed, feeling eyes turn toward them as they walked inside. The meeting began with 3 men and a woman, all dressed in designer suits, their smiles polished but their intentions sharp. They greeted Alexander warmly, their voices dripping with flattery, but their eyes flicked toward Elena, curious, assessing. "And who's this?" one of the men asked, his tone smooth but edged with interest. Alexander rested a hand lightly at the small of Elena's back, a gesture that sent heat rushing to her cheeks, and said in a voice that left no room for questions, "Someone I trust." The words hung in the air like a challenge. For the next hour, Elena sat silently, observing the dance of power and words around her. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, not just by the people at the table, but by Alexander himself. Every glance, Every small movement she made, she felt his eyes on her, as if waiting for her to slip. When the meeting finally ended, Alexander rose smoothly, thanked the group, and led her back to the car. The night air was cool, but Alina's skin burned under the weight of unspoken tension. As the car door closed and the city lights faded behind them, Alexander finally turned to her, his voice low and calm. "You did well tonight," he said. Relief flooded her chest until he added, with a glint in his eyes, "But that was the easy part." The mansion was silent when they returned, the long hallways echoing with the soft sound of their footsteps. Elena trailed slightly behind Alexander, her nerves still buzzing from the evening's events. She had survived the dinner, the scrutiny, and his unwavering gaze, but his last words haunted her. That was the easy part. What did he mean? Later that night, Elena finished tidying the dining area and retreated toward the staff quarters, exhaustion pressing down on her like a weight. She had just reached her door when she noticed something strange, the faint creak of floorboards in the hall behind her. She turned sharply. Nothing, just shadows stretching across the polished floor. Shaking her head, she stepped inside her room and closed the door softly. The tiny space felt suffocating tonight. She set the check inside her bag and sat on the edge of her bed, burying her face in her hands. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. "Mom's stable. Thank you for this. We'll make it through." Tears pricked Elena's eyes. For a moment, relief washed over her like a warm tide. But it didn't last, because deep down she knew this wasn't over. And she was right. In another wing of the mansion, Alexander stood in his private office, scrolling through the latest reports when Alexander stood in his private office, scrolling through the latest reports when Alexander stood in his private office. The intercom buzzed. "Sir," came the voice of his head of security. "You should know someone's been accessing restricted areas tonight." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Who?" "We're checking the cameras now. But sir, it looks like the south corridor, near the staff rooms." Alexander's eyes darkened. He didn't need more details. He moved quickly, his long strides silent against the marble floor, his instincts sharp. Elena's room. The sound came again. Louder this time. A soft click like a door handle turning. Elena's heart leapt into her throat. Slowly, she rose from the bed, every nerve screaming. The door opened an inch. Then another. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. No answer. Just the shadow of a man slipping inside. Before she could scream, a hand clamped over her mouth. A harsh voice hissed in her ear. "Don't make a sound." Elena's blood ran cold. The man's grip was iron strong, his other hand yanking open her drawers, searching. "What are you?" Her muffled cry died against his palm. "The check," he snarled under his breath. "Where is it? He paid you, didn't he?" Panic surged through her veins. How did he know? Who was this? Then she recognized him. Mark, one of the senior staff members. The one who always looked at her with something between disdain and greed. "You think you're special, huh?" He spat quietly. "He gives you money and you think you own this place? That check is mine." He tore through her bag, but before he could find it, the door slammed open. Alexander stood in the doorway, his face carved from fury, his presence filling the room like a storm. "What?" His voice was low, lethal. "Are you doing in her room?" Mark froze, his face draining of color. "Sir, Alexander didn't wait for excuses. In 2 strides he was across the room, his hand gripping Mark by the collar and slamming him against the wall so hard the frame rattled. "You touch what's mine," Alexander hissed, his voice cold enough to burn, "and you don't live to regret it," Mark stammered, his legs shaking. I wasn't, I swear." "Get out," Alexander growled, his tone like a blade. Before I decide you're not worth breathing. Security arrived within seconds, dragging the terrified man out while he pleaded for mercy. When the door finally shut and silence returned, Elena stood frozen, her chest heaving. Her eyes darted to Alexander, towering, furious, his fists still clenched, his breath heavy like a man fighting to control something dark inside him. "Are you hurt?" he asked sharply, stepping closer. Elena shook her head, words lodged in her throat. Then before she could react, he reached out and gripped her shoulders, his eyes burning into hers. "No one touches you? Ever. Do you understand me?" The heat of his hands seared through her blouse, his nearness overwhelming. Elena swallowed hard, nodding slowly, unable to look away. Something shifted in that moment, something neither of them could deny. His anger softened, just slightly, his voice dropping low. "I told you," he murmured, almost to himself, "you're not like everyone else." And then he let go, stepping back as if breaking a spell. "Pack your things," he said abruptly, his tone cold again. "You're not staying in this wing anymore." Elena blinked. "What? Why?" "Because Alexander said," his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable, "from now on, you stay where I can see you." Elena followed Alexander silently through the sprawling hallways of the mansion, her heart pounding with every step. She clutched her small bag tightly, her mind reeling. "Stay where I can see you." His words echoed like a drumbeat in her chest. What did he mean? Why did his voice sound less like an order and more like a confession he couldn't fully admit? Finally, they stopped at the farthest end of the east wing, a place she had never been before. The door Alexander unlocked opened into a suite so breathtaking it felt like another world. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering city skyline, and the space was bathed in soft golden light. Everything about it screamed wealth, power, and intimacy. Elena froze at the threshold. I can't stay here," she whispered. "You can," Alexander said firmly, holding the door open for her. "And you will." She turned to face him, her green eyes wide. "Why? Why are you doing this for me?" For a moment, his face was a mask of control. Then something broke, something raw and unguarded flickered in his gaze. "Because I can't protect you if I don't know where you are," he said quietly. "And after tonight, I realized something." Her breath hitched. "What?" "That for the first time in years," he said slowly, his voice deep and steady, "I care what happens to someone." Elena's heart stuttered. She had never heard him sound like this, never seen this man of iron and ice look almost human. "Alexander," she began, but the words tangled in her throat. He stepped closer, closing the space between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His eyes, those piercing gray eyes that had once terrified her, now held something else, something that made her knees weak. "When I left that safe open," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, "I wasn't just testing you, Elena. I was testing myself. To see if I could still believe in anyone. If I could still trust." She swallowed hard, tears prickling her eyes. "And did you?" His jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Then, softly, "Yes." The single word broke something inside her. All the fear, the uncertainty, the weight of debt and duty, it all shattered in that moment, replaced by something fierce and undeniable. Alexander reached up, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering against her cheek. "You're not like everyone else," he murmured. "You never were." Elena's breath trembled as his fingers slid to the back of her neck, drawing her closer. And when his lips finally found hers, it wasn't a kiss born of impulse. It was fire meeting ice, walls crashing down, years of loneliness colliding in one perfect storm. For a moment, the world disappeared. No debts, no deals, No tests, just two people who had found something rare in a world full of lies. Hours later, Elena stood by the window, the city lights painting her silhouette in silver. Alexander came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "You're staying here," he said, not as a command, but as a vow. "Where I can see you, where no one can touch you." She turned in his arms, meeting his gaze with a soft, steady smile. "And what about the test?" she asked gently. His lips curved into something almost tender. "You passed, Elena," he said. "Not because you didn't take the money, but because you made me want to trust again." She looked at him for a long moment, her heart full in a way it had never been before. Then she whispered the only truth that mattered. "I wasn't saving myself, Alexander. I was saving you too." He pulled her closer, his lips brushing her forehead. For the first time in years, the lonely CEO felt whole. And in that quiet, golden room at the top of his world, Alexander Knight knew one thing for certain. He had finally found the one person he could never buy, because she had already given him everything without a price. The end. Dear friend, if this story made you pause for even a moment, brought a tear to your eye, or stirred something deep inside your heart, then please give it a like. Maybe your one share becomes hope for someone else. And if you'd like to keep receiving stories that speak to the soul, don't forget to subscribe. It's the first step in our journey together. Oh, and please share your thoughts in the comments, because every word from you means the world to me. Thank you. Truly from the heart.